Story 1. My first job back when I was a freshman was as a program attendant at one of the city fairs. For this job, I was situated in a small park-like field that had several tents, each with an activity for kids to enjoy with their families. On the day this incident happened, I was assigned to a tent where children could design little toys such as pinwheels, folding fans, paper masks, and similar crafts. Everything was going smoothly until an uncle came in with his 3 nieces. They started coloring a tote bag, and while things were still going well, the uncle asked me if there were any chargers. I told him that there were none available in my area, but if he wanted, he could go to the guest services building where they had all kinds of chargers: Apple, Android, and Universal Serial Bus, also known as USB. Unfortunately, he said it was too far since his nieces were still doing their activity. He then asked if there was at least an outlet, because the activity was set up in a vast open park. There were no outlets nearby, so I suggested he check the building where the washrooms were. He tried but came back unsuccessful, looking more desperate. Finally, I gave him another option. He could go ask the staff in the sound tent. Since they managed all the equipment for performers, chances were they would have an outlet. He seemed relieved and told one of his nieces that he would be right back before leaving. The problem was that on the way, he tried to unplug one of the speakers used by performers. Luckily, I was able to stop him just in time. Once he left, I continued helping his nieces with the activity. Since the sound tent was still in view, I was not too worried. After a while, the girls finished their project, but their uncle had not returned. That is when I started to feel uneasy, but the oldest niece said she would go find him. She headed off while I moved on to help another family. Not long after, I noticed the niece returning, but not with her uncle. She was with one of the supervisors. When I asked what had happened, the supervisor explained that the niece had come up to her sadly asking where her uncle was. That made me very concerned. The number 1 rule at the youth zone was that children must be supervised at all times, and this man had simply run off. I asked the niece if she had a way to contact him. She said she didn't have his phone number, but could call her father, who might then call her uncle. At first, we were somewhat relieved, but I pointed out another problem. If the uncle was looking for a charger when he left, then his phone was probably dead, which meant calling him might not even work. The good news was that we eventually found him after about an hour. You will not believe where he was on the main stage, where all the children's performers were, such as magicians, costumed characters, and children's music groups. And once again, he was trying to unplug one of their speakers, just like he had tried to do at the smaller stage earlier. Now, this brings us to rule number 2. Only 3 groups of people are allowed on the main stage. First, the performers themselves. Second, the staff. Third, audience members, but only when invited by performers, and only when there are no ongoing performances. Outside of that, nobody is allowed on the stage whatsoever. The supervisor went over to talk to him. I could not hear their conversation, but I could tell she was furious. She was making sharp hand motions the entire time, and when the uncle finally came back, he looked embarrassed. He quickly told his nieces it was time to leave. At first, I thought this was just another story about a careless caregiver. But after my shift ended, the supervisor told me her side of the conversation. During it, he had complained that there were not enough outlets. She was stunned and replied, "Where exactly can we put them? It is an open field." She became even more upset, explaining that the speakers he kept trying to unplug were expensive, worth about $1,000 each. Not only had he gone into an off-limits area, but he had also tampered with costly equipment. So in the end, this man broke 3 rules of the fair simply because he had not planned ahead. Then he had the nerve to blame the staff for something none of us had any control over, since we did not even design the area. Story 2. After work, I walked to the bar to meet some friends for drinks. My bladder was acting like it was the size of a walnut, so I had to keep going back and forth to the washroom, passing a party of 4 at a table each time. On the return of my first washroom trip, I heard something like, "Come here, you," from a woman who looked as though she had just dipped her head in a bucket of makeup. Her lack of manners did not deserve a response, so I ignored it and kept moving along. On my second trip to the washroom, since I hadn't gotten it all out, this woman suddenly grabbed my arm, digging her nails in while pulling me close. She repeated the same words 4 times while tapping her glass with the nails of her other hand. She probably thought she was coming across as stylish and elegant, but in reality, she just seemed aggressive and unpleasant. I told her firmly, "I don't work here, lady." She let go, and I walked away. The thing is, at this bar, any waiter can serve any table. They don't come to you. You just need to catch their attention like she must have done when she got the drinks she already had. I doubted they would have gone that long without serving her at least once. But she seemed determined now, convinced that I, specifically, had to be the one to help her. On my third trip to the washroom, things were worse than usual that night. I caught her giving me a death glare. On my way back, she kicked her bag under my feet, trying to trip me up. She somewhat succeeded and snarled that I had better not have broken anything. Then, with no shame, she demanded to know where her drinks were. "Fair game now," I told her. "Back in a moment. They'll be on the house," and then returned to my table. Thankfully, a wall blocked her from my line of sight. I was in my safe space, away from the chaos, sitting comfortably with my friends and our drinks. Perfect. The place was unusually quiet, so a few minutes later I clearly heard a commotion break out. Of course, it was her. She was arguing loudly with the manager and one of the waiters about not being served. She insisted that the waiter had promised her free drinks and threatened to leave if they weren't brought to her. The manager spoke in a soft tone, so I couldn't make out his words, but her loud, obnoxious voice carried through the whole room. A storm was brewing. I sat there waiting, but I couldn't hold it any longer. I had to make yet another washroom trip. I took a different route, hoping to avoid her, but when I came back out, she noticed me. She gripped her drink so tightly, it looked like she wanted to crush it as though it were some kind of trophy. Her eyes locked on me like she was on a mission. Looking like a rather unpleasant meerkat on the lookout, she was clearly ready to cause trouble. I decided, oh, forget it, and walked past her table at speed, pretending I was rushing to explain myself. But instead, I zoomed by with a big, goofy, vacant smile. It was like trolling in real life. Then came the explosion. She grabbed a large jug of ice from the table and hurled it at my back, shrieking in what looked like some kind of wild, chaotic display. It struck me, and while I wasn't injured, the shock made me stumble and fall. The manager came rushing over. By now, sweat was pouring down her face, and the makeup she had layered on was starting to blend together. Her temper looked like it was pushing blood pressure numbers through the roof. She was screaming, determined to get what she wanted. An older woman nearby spoke up, saying something like, she just threw the jug at him for no reason and demanded he buy her a free drink. That was close enough to the truth and only made her look even more unhinged. The manager immediately threw her out, telling her she was banned from the bar and warning that if she ever came back, the police would be called. That only made her more hostile, and she started making threats, claiming that her boyfriend's yes, plural, would come down to deal with the situation. The manager calmly asked her to confirm whether she was making a physical threat. Grinding her teeth, she stomped out, struggling to keep balance in her heels. She walked with an exaggerated alpha strut, but looked like she was tearing her ankle with each step, possibly even considering a trip to accident and emergency afterward. The manager came back to me and apologized. I told him it was fine, it wasn't his fault, and he handled it well. She was simply out of control. Then he offered, "Can I get you and your friends around? It's on the house." At that moment, during those first few sips, I swear I could taste justice. It had earthy tones, with a hint of citrus, and the faint aroma of a courtroom mixed with elderflower. Story 3. Cast of characters, entitled Mom and Psycho-Racist Dad. We fostered a really sweet and affectionate 2-year-old cat for a few weeks before she was adopted by a family, and we took her over on a Monday. She seemed to be happy and relaxed there. I started getting calls from the entitled mother saying that the cat was acting strange and all itchy, like she had a skin issue. She sent me a video of the cat rolling around on the ground being cute and playful. Perfectly normal cat behavior. The entitled mother kept texting me about stuff that was totally normal cat behavior, like rubbing her face on things to mark them with her scent. My explanations didn't seem to satisfy this Karen. Psycho Dad called me on Thursday afternoon to demand that I come over. Why? Because they needed me to put the cat in her carrier to take her to the vet to find out what was wrong with her. I politely texted them, "Hi. Please send an email to address x@catrescue.org with your concerns about our cat, and she will advise accordingly. Thanks." That's when things got real. At 11:30 p.m. that night, my phone started blowing up with phone calls, text messages, and even FaceTime requests from the Psycho Dad and entitled mother's phones, demanding that I come and get the cat. 9 calls, texts, and FaceTimes, guys, all of which I ignored. I know this because I documented it all for the restraining order. On Friday morning, I got another call, but this time the Psycho Dad left a threatening voicemail, which I had professionally transcribed. "By the way, I'm Asian, but I grew up here. It's funny that, as that now you've disappeared. I don't know where you're from, but I'm going to mess up your life, you jerk. Alright. I will mess up with your life and ruin all your business. And I am resourceful and I can do it. You gave us a mentally sick cat, mentally sick. It screams all day long, screams all night long, non-stop. Not because of food, not because of attention, not because of anything. She's just abused. She's been abused, okay? I don't mind that, taking care of an abused cat, but I didn't know that I had a monster. This is a monster. My kids didn't sleep. They have tests in the morning. And you just painted like the rosiest picture, with your stupid hair. If I was not ill, I would have strangled you, you jerk." Once again, all documented for the restraining order. Also, if you're going to leave a cat locked in a tiny bathroom for 4 days straight, she's going to meow a bit. That's when I sent my one and only reply. Please do not contact me again. Please work with catrescue.org to resolve any issues you may have. Thank you. A fairly tame response given that I had been threatened, don't you think? He sent a threatening text and called me an asshole. Well, after all this, the entitled mother dropped off the cat at a vet associated with the rescue group, where the kitty spent the night, and now she's back at our house. The vet came out and spoke to me when I picked the cat up, and the vet was so angry at this family because the cat is super sweet. Anyway, this family has now been banned from the agency, and word is being spread around the foster and adoption agencies to steer clear of them. I've also filed a restraining order against them. Story 4. It was fairly recently the anniversary of my mother's passing. This complicated situation happened decades ago, and it's a very long story to tell, so it has to be split into 2 posts. My unrepentant father has been in the ground since 2020. I'll let you all guess why. But he was a very mine kind of person. My mother fit right in with him because she was very me, and extremely dramatic. Both were extremely narcissistic, entitled, and at times even borderline cruel. They were generally bitter whenever they didn't get their way on anything, big or small. I'm not really sure if I was an unwanted or unplanned child. They never said, but I was an only child, and as I got older, I became their primary target. Punishments were generally carried out by my mother at first. She had a strange obsession with spanking that led to me being a meek child early on, until I grew bigger and realized she wasn't so tough. As I got older and stronger, I actually stopped reacting to the pain when she spanked me because I had gotten used to it. My friends even gave me the nickname Hardback, which they still use to this day. When the spanking stopped working, my mother even checked me for bruises and actually started sobbing when I told her that the belt did nothing to me anymore. Anyone I've told this to has called her everything from a projecting sadist to simply unstable, because she literally cried that she could no longer punish me by spanking. The few people who defended her actions kept telling me it was a different time, and that spanking was all some parents had. But I disagreed with that completely. As for my father, He had a hair-trigger temper and would easily fly into a rage in an instant, especially when accused of being wrong about something. He used to punch holes in the walls until one day he hit a stud and broke his hand. After that, he put up a punching bag in the garage to vent on, and he wore that thing out. He was also financially controlling with me, and I always had to hide any money I earned from him. He always grew angry that he couldn't find it. Despite the constant threats of harm from him, and even sometimes actual harm, eventually I grew indifferent to his behavior. I just did the chores I was told to do, and then whatever I could to make money, which I cleverly hid in multiple places just in case one of my stashes was found. Somehow I hid them too well because my father never found any of them. I had been working practically since I was 10. I was a big kid for my age and basically the spitting image of Bobby Hill until puberty hit. I managed to work mowing lawns, raking leaves, and doing other odd jobs until I got a real part-time job at 15. Aside from his narcissism and temper, my father was naturally large and broad-shouldered with a flat-top haircut until he went bald, and he fancied himself as a tough guy. He was the type to flex his doughy muscles in front of a mirror to admire himself. That is, until he actually got beaten badly by someone else. It was a man trained in martial arts who was a whole head shorter than him. I saw it happen from the window of our family car when I was a kid. I don't know what started the fight, but I know what ended it. A roundhouse kick to the face. My father lost a tooth that day. After that, he seemed to intentionally only pick on people weaker than him, like me as a child. He also liked to brag about being a Vietnam veteran. But in reality, he only served in the Coast Guard for his entire military service. He was always careful not to say too much, lest he be called out for faking his records. I believe they call that stolen valor now, but correct me if I'm wrong. When I purchased my first car at 16 in 1991, my father took every opportunity to remind me that the car was registered in his name. Because I was 16, I couldn't put it in my own name when I bought it. It was a 1982 Chevy Cavalier. I wouldn't say I was in love with the car, but it was my first one. I bought it from an old barn mechanic who fixed and sold junk cars in the neighborhood. The guy liked challenges and really should have owned his own shop. The Cavalier had been previously wrecked and sold at auction or something. 2 of the doors and the passenger fender had been replaced with ones of a different color, and the central door frame had been replaced with a new welded-in piece. There were dents, dings, and weld marks all over the passenger side. It was ugly under a salvage title and painfully slow, but it ran fairly well. At the time, it was less than 10 years old. I paid nearly everything I had saved for that car. My parents also treated me having that car as an open pass to force me to run their errands. They hated it whenever I asked for gas money in return. If I was defiant about anything, they would take the car away and tell me that life wasn't fair. I would reply that it was the same for them because I couldn't run their errands without gas, so I guess I just wasn't going. Then they would begrudgingly hand me the keys back and give me some cash for fuel. This happened many times. My mother also used me as a taxi service to drive around some relatives and her best friend, who was also a dramatic and self-centered woman. Thankfully, she never had kids. Sadly, she eventually passed away homeless and struggling with addiction. My parents also used me as their designated driver so they could go out drinking. Because they only came back whenever they felt like it, I'd often be stuck waiting in the car for hours with nothing to do but sit with a lantern, reading books, Archie Digest comics, or working on my school homework. That went on until one night a police officer knocked on the window to ask why a 16-year-old like me was sitting in a bar parking lot past 10 p.m. He was furious when I explained why. He asked for my parents' names and then went inside the bar. Before long, I heard the music inside suddenly stop, and a few minutes later the officer marched my parents out like a drill sergeant. They were furious with me, but what was I supposed to do? He was a police officer, and I had to tell the truth. They huffed and puffed, but from then on they just had me return to pick them up at a designated time. They always stuck to it after that, out of fear of having a repeat encounter with law enforcement. Police were one of the few things my parents actually feared, though even that fear didn't always stop them. I had my first car less than 6 months before my father took it away. His rusty, patchwork El Camino finally died for good, and he junked it. Since my car was already in his name, he simply took it. He made sure to tell me straight to my face, like a schoolyard bully, that there was nothing I could do about it. My mother was of no help. She only agreed with him. She was his biggest supporter and said parents must always have the cars first, even if the kids bought them. Remember, this happened in the days before the internet, let alone social media. The most I could do was complain to nearby relatives, people at school, mainly my friends and the guidance counselor. But nothing ever came of it because my father refused to give the car back when confronted. There was no way to prove the car was supposed to be mine anyway. Everything had been paid for in cash, and the car was legally registered only in his name. I never got the money I had saved and paid for it back either. After my father took the car, he repainted the Cavalier black. I wouldn't exactly call the paint job an improvement, though he did fix some of the body damage moderately well. My father acted as if the car had never been mine and was overly proud of the work he did to it. He made me sit through repeated speeches about the meticulous effort he supposedly put into it while he was completely drunk. If by meticulous he meant repainting it with lots of cheap spray paint you could get back then for less than $1 a can, then sure. I gave up on ever getting that car back and didn't bother to buy another one until I was 18. I got some practice here and there with my mother's old car whenever she forced me to run errands and drive people. Her car was an old 1960s Vista Cruiser, but I still missed my Cavalier, and my father openly rubbed it in my face that it was his car. He even dangled the keys in front of me while mocking me a few times. Though my mother usually supported him, she actually told him to stop acting like a child the final time he did that. He sulked afterward while blasting his record player. I spent the next year and a half plotting my escape, working nonstop and saving every penny. By the time I was 18 and had finished high school, I had rebuilt my savings. Once again, I went back to that barn mechanic. By then we had become friends since I regularly visited him in my spare time to watch him work. He sold me a beige 1979 Chevy Caprice estate wagon with fake wood paneling on the sides and a tow hitch on the back. He had swapped in a different engine pulled from another junked car after the original one failed. But it ran well, and my mechanic friend even managed to get the air conditioning working. I just had to pay to have it recharged at a shop. That car was exactly what I needed. I bought it on the spot with a deal he offered. It was practically a steal, and I walked away with more than half the money I came there with. Right after, I went and opened up my own checking account at a bank. The mechanic knew how badly I needed a car to plan my eventual escape, so he had set the Caprice wagon aside for me since it was roomy enough to camp in. I was more than happy with the car. It wasn't good on fuel mileage, but it could take me wherever I needed to go, and junkyard parts were plentiful. And yes, I got plenty of Griswold jokes. All the same, I didn't tell my parents about the car. I didn't dare bring it home until I received the new title in the mail so I could hide it. Unfortunately, my mother got to the title from the mailbox before me and opened it without my permission. I had to yank it out of her hands when she confronted me. When I took the title away, she screamed for me to give it back and then said, "Just wait till your father gets home," when I refused. I ran off and didn't return until night. When I entered the house, my father grabbed me and slammed me against the wall. He was furious that I had bought a car without his knowledge, and even angrier that I hadn't registered it in his name. Even though I was 18, he still expected legal ownership of my vehicle. He and my mother outright demanded that I sign over the Caprice as punishment for what they saw as disobedience. But I refused and told them it was mine. My father looked like he was about to hit me until I laughed and told him to just go ahead. Instead, he threw me to the floor and told me to go to my room without dinner. For days afterward, he tried to get me to hand over the title so he could sign the car over to himself. He couldn't stand not being in control, but I had hidden it at a friend's house. Even under repeated threats, I didn't give it to him. After about a week, he told me to get out of his house since I was 18 and, wanted to be independent so badly. And I did. I had wanted to stay a little longer to save more money, but at that point I didn't care anymore. I packed what I could onto the front lawn and then went to get my car. My father inspected the Caprice as I was loading it, scrutinizing it, and saying it was too good for a disrespectful brat like me, even though it was far from new. He then pointed out that the car would suit my mother better since her Vista Cruiser was similar, but much older. He demanded that I trade with her. I just laughed and said that wasn't happening, especially since the Caprice had working air conditioning. That infuriated him even more, and he began demanding harder that I make the trade. He was practically foaming at the mouth, yelling that they deserved the Caprice because it was so much better. I told him my answer would always be the same, no matter what he said, a big, fat no. He stomped back into the house to stand with his arms crossed, glaring at me from the living room window. If looks could cause explosions, his would have. Then my mother took her turn. She tried to convince me that signing the car over to my father would be smarter both for insurance costs and because it meant I could remain at home. I told her I would never be foolish enough to put a car in my father's name again, because he would just take it away like he did the Cavalier. It was obvious they wanted control, and I wasn't going to hand it over. My mother tried to deny it, but I told her I couldn't trust a word she said. Then I looked her in the eyes and told her to be honest, because there was no other reason they wanted my car in his name other than to take it away for themselves. She gave up the act and started sobbing, wailing, "Why can't you just obey us? We raised you." I replied, "Because I'm an adult, and I deserve to have my own life. I'm not your servant." She started wailing incoherently and went back inside. From the window, I could see my father cradling her while glaring at me like I was pure evil. I finished packing and drove out of there before he did something worse. I never set foot in my parents' house again. For a while, I lived out of my Caprice wagon. It wasn't easy, but the car was big enough that I could sleep in the back. I stayed around town for a bit, working to save money and figuring out my next step. My parents knew where I was, and my father kept showing up at my workplace to pressure me about signing over the Caprice. He acted like I had no right to it, as if he still owned me even though I was legally an adult. He would stand outside the shop, watching me, waiting for me to come out. Sometimes he tried to follow me home, but I always managed to lose him. It was clear he wasn't going to stop. He wanted control, and he couldn't stand the fact that I had taken it away from him. Eventually, I managed to rent a small, run-down trailer. It wasn't much, but it was mine. My father showed up there too, uninvited, and tried to barge in. He yelled at me through the door, insisting that I was making a huge mistake by living on my own and that the car should still belong to him. I told him to leave, and when he refused, I called the police. When the officers arrived, my father played the victim, acting as though I was the ungrateful one. But the police made him leave, and after that, he stopped trying to break into the trailer. Still, he never let up about the car. Every time he saw me in town, he made a scene, ranting that I had stolen the Caprice from him. Despite all of this, I held firm. The Caprice was mine, the title was in my name, and I wasn't going to hand it over. The car wasn't just transportation, it was freedom. It was proof that I could live on my own, make my own choices, and not be under their thumb anymore. My parents acted like I had betrayed them, but in truth, all I did was refuse to be controlled. The more they tried to guilt me or force me into submission, the more determined I became to stand my ground. And no matter how many times they demanded it, I never gave them that car. Life in the trailer wasn't glamorous, but it was a big step up from living in the back of the Caprice. I had my own space, no one telling me what to do, and a steady enough income to keep food on the table and gas in the tank. But the peace didn't last long. My father couldn't stand being ignored, and he wasn't ready to let go of control. He started showing up more frequently. Sometimes he'd stand outside the trailer shouting insults, demanding that I come out and face him. Other times he tried to guilt me, saying that I had abandoned the family and that my mother was sick with grief because of my selfish choices. It got so bad that I eventually had to stop answering the door altogether. If he couldn't get inside, he would leave angry notes taped to the door, scribbled in all caps, ordering me to bring the Caprice to him. I always tore them up without reading the whole thing. The trailer itself became another issue. It was old, and the landlord wasn't exactly responsible with repairs. The roof leaked when it rained, the plumbing barely worked, and the electrical wiring was questionable at best. But it was mine, and that meant more to me than anything else at the time. After one particularly heated confrontation, where my father blocked me in with his car and tried to force me into handing over the Caprice keys, I realized that this wasn't going to stop unless I took serious action. I warned him that if he kept harassing me, I'd file for a restraining order. That only made him angrier. He ranted that no judge in the world would side with a disrespectful brat over his own father. But I wasn't bluffing, and he must have realized it because he started keeping more distance after that. The stress of dealing with him, while also trying to hold my life together in that trailer, eventually wore me down. I worked as much as I could, but every dollar went to bills, repairs, and just trying to survive. My father's constant looming presence didn't help. Finally, I made the decision to move away entirely. I packed up my belongings, loaded them into the Caprice, and left town without telling anyone where I was going. I didn't give my parents an address, and I didn't answer their calls anymore. It was the only way to get real peace. From that point forward, I never looked back. My parents saw my independence as betrayal, but to me, it was survival. I chose freedom, and even though it was a tough road, I knew it was the only path where I could truly be myself. Looking back, the whole battle with my parents was never really about cars. The Cavalier, the Caprice, even the trailer, those were just symbols. What it was really about was control. My father couldn't handle the idea of me making choices for myself, and my mother always stood behind him, no matter how unreasonable he was. The Cavalier was the first lesson. I bought it with my own money, but once it was in his name, he used that as an excuse to take it away. That betrayal was burned into my memory, and it's the reason I never let him near the title of the Caprice. He wanted power, not responsibility. The Caprice, on the other hand, was more than just a car. It was my escape plan, my shelter, and my freedom. Every time I looked at it, I remembered that I had worked for it, bought it myself, and protected it from being taken. That car gave me the courage to finally leave for good. The trailer wasn't much, but it was proof that I could survive without their control. Every leaky roof, every flickering light, every frustrating repair reminded me that independence was worth the struggle. Even when my father tried to tear me down, I refused to hand over what little I had built for myself. Cutting ties wasn't easy. Walking away from your family never is. But the truth is, sometimes family can be the very thing holding you back. My parents demanded obedience, but what I wanted was respect. Since they weren't willing to give it, I had to step away and live life on my own terms. And in the end, I have no regrets. I may have lost contact with them, but I gained something far more valuable: freedom. I was no longer a servant to someone else's control. I had my own life, my own choices, and a future that belonged to me. That old Caprice wagon might have guzzled gas and earned me endless Griswold jokes, but to me, it represented victory. It was proof that I could stand up, say no, and walk away from a toxic situation without looking back. And that's exactly what I did.